Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the Pranzata Podcast. This is your host, Andrea Pranzatelli. This is episode number 71 on this podcast. We are going to do a solo podcast today. Had quite a busy weekend. I had a gig and a band rehearsal, a couple other things going on, so I couldn't really schedule an in-person guest, but I wanted to keep the Monday ritual going, so we're going to do a solo podcast today, which is going to be mainly focused on questions and answers that my Instagram followers sent me on Instagram. And by the way, if anybody wants to ask a question for future question and answer podcasts, you can follow me on Instagram. The link is below, and send me your question on Instagram. That's the easiest way to do it. Or you can just ask the question in the comment section here. Either is good. Before we get into it, I just have a few things to say that I wanted to bring up on this podcast before we get into the questions. And also, if you're new, don't forget to hit subscribe. My goal is to grow this channel this year to reach more people. I've been putting a lot more effort into the channel this year, and it's a dream of mine to be able to connect and reach more people every year. So if you guys can hook me up, hit subscribe. Okay, so first thing before we get into the questions, I want to bring up, I wanted to let you guys know about something I'm going through, which I find very strange. And I'm just bringing it up because I want to know if anybody has an explanation for it, if anybody's been through the same thing themselves. It's also just kind of like interesting to me. So lately I've been going through an insomnia period, like a very strange insomnia phase, where I'm only sleeping between 2 to 6 hours a night, depending on the night. Like some nights I'll get only 2 hours of sleep, and then some nights, if I'm lucky, I'll get 6 hours of sleep. Probably on average about 3 to 4 hours of sleep. But I still wake up every single day feeling super refreshed and energized. I have like mixed feelings about it. On one hand, I'm like, this is fucking awesome. But on the other hand, I'm like genuinely concerned about my health. I'm like, what the hell is going on? I'm like, is this a manic phase? Because like a mental illness like type of thing, because bipolar disorder runs in my family, and mania is a symptom of bipolar disorder where people get this like euphoric energy. But here's the thing though, a lot of the times, just from my experience and what I've seen growing up with, the person in my family who has bipolar disorder, during their manic phase, they would do things that they couldn't remember and they would regret. As far as I know, I'm not doing anything like that. When I'm awake, all these extra hours of the day, I just use it to work on music, to work on my podcast, to work out. So it's not like I'm like manic and, having sex with strangers and doing crazy things like that. I'm just working on myself. So I'm like, what the hell is going on? Is this a productive mania? Like, what the hell? Like, I don't know. The only thing I can think of is that I've been doing a lot of meditating lately, and in my meditations, I do the deep breathing, and then I try to just clear my mind. And then after I feel relaxed, I'll usually say, like, set an intention, or I'll pray, ask the universe for help with something. And one thing I've been asking the universe for help for is I've been saying, please this year, give me the time, like give me the strength to find the time in my day to work on my ambitions. Because right now I'm in kind of a tight situation where I'm working and, I have my own business teaching lessons, and I'm using a lot of the money I'm making from that to pay off debts that I have that have been holding my creativity back. I've struggled with a lot of student loan debt and credit card debt from things in the past and that type of thing. So on one hand, like, I have to work a job and I have to work a lot of hours to pay off those debts. But on the other hand, I have a lot of goals and ambitions, for myself, like for creativity and everything like that. And it felt impossible. It felt like there wasn't enough time in the day. So I have been like praying, during my meditations, like, please help me find a solution. And it almost feels like the universe was like, listen, bitch, you can't afford to leave your job right now. Right now you need to stay in it to pay, off your debts. So the only way we're going to give you this is just by giving you energy, like manic energy. And that's the only way that's what it genuinely feels like, because I really don't understand why this is happening. I just want to know if anyone else has been through this, like if they've had insomnia or like a productive insomnia. Like, is there an explanation for that? What the hell? I was pretty pissed about it at first, and I was concerned, like, is this going to make me unhealthy? Like, am I going to die young, like, from not sleeping? But I'm kind of just not fighting it now. I'm like, well, rather than just laying in bed for hours to try to sleep, let me just wake up and do something with the energy. So I don't know. I just wanted to bring that up. I thought that was interesting. The second thing I want to talk about, this is going to be so left field, like, what the fuck did this come from? But I actually thought this was super interesting, so I just wanted to share it on the podcast. So my boyfriend and I were eating waffles the other day, and randomly we were just like talking about it. Where did the idea of like this square grid pattern come from? Like, when you think about it, what is a waffle and where did it come from? Why are we eating these little cakes like shaped like squares? Like, what's the history of it? You know what I mean? Because like, you know, we eat we sometimes we do things and we're like, wait a second, like, why is this an appealing design, like these little square grids? So we were curious about it and we started looking it up. And I thought the history, like, we just literally like Googled the history of waffles, and we found a Wikipedia page like with this whole history of waffles. And we both found it so incredibly interesting. So I wanted to share it with you. So the first waffle, this blew my fucking mind. And by the way, not only waffle, but waffle iron. So waffle and the iron to create the waffle. The first waffle came from the medieval Greek times. That's how old waffles go back. And this was even more fascinating to me. The first waffle, where waffles came from and how we got to the waffles today, the very first waffle was the body of Christ. That was the first waffle. So I think that's really cool. Probably going to, when I edit this podcast, I'm going to insert a photo of like what the first waffle iron and what, you know, those ancient waffles first looked like that were the body of Christ. This blew my mind because I'm like, how the fuck did they even heat up how did they make the iron? I just have a lot to learn about history, I guess you could say. And like, so to me, I'm like, how did in the ancient Greek, like medieval Greek times, did they even have the means to make the iron and heat it up? I guess they were able to make they made things back then. So I guess they were somehow able to make the iron, and I guess maybe they would heat it up over a fire. That part I didn't look that part up. But so basically, that's where the first, like, every time you eat a waffle, you're basically eating a very evolved body of Christ, which is crazy. And so the first waffles didn't have those square shapes. So I'm going to get to, like, you know, where that evolved. But the first waffles were like adorned with flowers, you know, whatever was popular back then. You know, they tried to make it beautiful to represent, you know, religion and the body of Christ. But I guess what happened was, over time, over centuries, different, mainly European countries, I think only European countries, and, you know, the United States obviously, would kind of have their own take and variation on the waffles. And it wasn't until I could be like, don't like take this, you know, verbatim, because I could be off, but I'm pretty sure it was the 16th century that, was it yeah, it was. I think it was the 16th. It was either 15th or 16th. So you might want to look this up, and I don't have an assistant to like fact check this for me. But it was either the 15th or the 16th century that the first like square grid, like, you know, they went through all these different patterns of waffle shapes, and it was the 15th or the 16th century that the very first square, you know, grid shape happened. And I'm pretty sure I think it was the French and the Belgium that both had the square shape. They both did it. And that's where you get the name, the Belgian waffle. Why the square shape ended up being the one that stuck with us, like, because there were these other like beautiful creations with like flowers. And so I don't know why, like, we decided like the square was the best one. But regardless, that's how we got there with the waffles, is that it's basically just a very evolved body of Christ. I would imagine, like, I couldn't find this in my research, but I would imagine the reason why we stayed with the square shape was maybe it just tasted better, like, because of the fluffiness of it or whatever. I don't know. I think that's super fucking interesting. I hope I didn't just bore everybody, but I thought that was really cool. My boyfriend thought it was cool too, so I thought you guys might like that. Okay, I have one more thing I want to talk about before I get into the questions. The third thing I want to talk about is I want to give an update on eating disorders. I've shared this on my channel before, and I kind of wanted to update everybody where I'm at with this. So as some of you know, or maybe you don't know, this might be new, I had a history of an eating disorder that I recovered. I want to say, this isn't an episode about the eating disorder, so I'm going to kind of like, say this quickly. I might, if you have any questions about that, or if you want me to do a full episode about my experience with an eating disorder, I could do that. But this is more just bringing up like something pretty interesting that I've noticed, like where I'm at right now with it. So in a nutshell, to try to, make the beginning of the story as quick as possible, I had an eating disorder. It started when I was about 22, 23-ish, maybe 24. I don't remember exactly when, but it was around that age, 22, 23, 24. I'm 34, going on 35 now. It started as an innocent, like, want or desire to improve my life. Like, I remember when I was 22 or 23-ish, whatever, I went through this phase where I, like, really just wanted to improve my life. I was a waitress in a restaurant and I didn't really have any direction. I didn't know where I wanted to go. I didn't know what I wanted my career to be. I wasn't even really like in college at this point. Like I was taking college courses at a community college, like, but I didn't like have any goal, like, you know what I mean? So I just remember going through this motivational time in my life. So getting in shape was an honest, like, started as a healthy thing. But somehow that evolved into being addicted to the weight loss, so before you know it, I had a healthy desire just to lose 5 pounds. And then I guess there might have been some stress going on in my life at the time, and some, I guess you could say, maybe there was like suppressed psychological issues from the past that I was dealing with. I'm not sure exactly why this eating disorder happened, but regardless, in the process of trying to become healthier, I sort of became addicted to the weight loss. Like every time I would lose a pound, I would feel this like euphoric, powerful feeling. And then like a week later, I'd be like, let's do it again. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. And I wasn't really like looking at the big picture. And before you know it, I'm like less than 100 pounds. I'm probably going to show you guys a picture of my skinniest so you can see, the evolution of where I started and how I got here. It wasn't until I started having health issues that I decided I wanted to like start gaining weight again, because again, I was so hooked on like this feeling of control or power I had over my life, because probably my life felt very out of control at the time due to like personal issues that I was going through. That it really took me almost dying to realize like, oh, this isn't healthy, I remember it got to a point where I was less than 100 pounds and I was, I didn't get a menstrual period anymore. That was like my first sign that something needed to change. And then the second sign was that TMI, but I literally wasn't going to the bathroom anymore. And even though my body was like stick thin, yeah, that's a phrase, right? Stick thin. I don't know why, but it felt like it wasn't a phrase, but I think it actually is stick thin. Even though I had this very skinny body, my stomach was protruding and it was like this huge pot belly. And it almost made things worse because I'm like, I wanted to be skinny and then I had this huge pot belly. But then I had looked into it and apparently, and I might include a picture of this as well, apparently this is a very common body figure in poor countries where people are starving, and it's called starvation mode. So starvation mode is when people have this like very skinny body but this huge pot belly, and what's happening, and you don't go to the bathroom. What's happening is your body is saying like, we need this food. We have to keep this food. So your body stops pooping, like literally, like your body just holds on to the food because it's like, dude, we need this food to survive. So you end up getting this huge pot belly. So it wasn't until the pot belly, like the starvation mode thing happened, and then me not getting my period anymore, that I was like, I need to, like, there's something seriously wrong. I know I said I wasn't going to get into too much detail about this, but I guess I just went for it, whatever. Fast forward, why I'm even bringing this up is that I didn't even realize until recently that I was still, to a degree, struggling with my eating disorder over the past few years. So after recovering from, that very skinny starvation mode and finally being able to put on weight for my health and for survival, I was able to get my body up to 120 pounds, and which was healthy, healthy enough to survive. But it didn't occur to me till really recently that even though I was healthy enough to live and I was getting my period again, I still had this like rigid control over the number 120 pounds. Like, it was like, okay, I got myself to this point where I was healthy enough to live, but I still had this like, I got to stay 120 pounds. It was like kind of like this, yes, I'm good enough, but I can't let go of this. Like, I have to hold on to this, because if I go over 120 pounds, I'm fat. Like, I had this kind of like mental barrier there where it was like this very rigid control. So even though I was healthy enough, you know what I mean, and I was doing well, it really didn't occur to me that that was still to a degree part of the eating disorder. And from what I understand, people who have disorders like that, it's not an overnight fix. Like, when you heal and you recover, it could take 10 years, and it did for me. What I want to bring up is that I actually think I'm over the eating disorder for the first time, because I'm now 140 pounds and I'm okay with it. And it's just wild to me. Like, I don't want to start crying or get emotional about it, just like talking about it with you, but it's completely wild to me that if you had asked me like even a year ago, like not even 2 or 3 years ago, if you had asked me over a year ago, you're going to be 140 pounds next year, that would have freaked me out. Like, that would have made me feel like I'm out of control. I'm fat. I'm disgusting. Like, it would have freaked me out. What ended up happening was, a couple of things contributed to the weight gain that I went through, and a positive weight gain, by the way, not like a negative weight gain. I gained 20 pounds this year. Like, when you think about it, I was 120 last year. I mean, 20 pounds is a significant amount of weight to gain in a year. I think where it started was I got a boyfriend, and I was really excited about like cooking. Like, I was like, oh, I have and this doesn't sound hip at all. It sounds like kind of like anti-feminist or whatever, but I really, like, I personally enjoy cooking for a man. It just kind of, it's like a sign of affection to me. Like, it's something I love doing. So I'm like, oh, I have a boyfriend now, I could start cooking things. So I was like cooking all these Italian, like, garlic bread, like things I wouldn't normally eat. Like, last year I was very like, no bread, no this, no that, no desserts, no that. Like, I was pretty strict with my diet. And now I'm like, ooh, I have someone to like cook for. So, you have to appeal to the person you're cooking for. So I was like, what do you like? And he's like, well, I like garlic bread and I like pasta. And I'm like, fuck it, like, I'll just make him what he likes. And in the process, I was trying all these foods. So I think at first I didn't gain the 20 pounds right away, but I think at that point I gained like 5 pounds. And I remember feeling some resistance there and feeling like kind of stressed about it. Like, I was like, oh shit, I'm gaining weight, I need to get this under control. So the resistance was still there. It wasn't until really the past like 3 months that the rest of the weight gain happened, like the extra 15 pounds that brought it up to 20 pounds, for a few reasons. One, I was moving. So during the moving process, I had packed all my cooking gear, you know what I mean? So I didn't have time to cook for a few weeks because I wanted all my things packed. So I had like, for probably 2 weeks, I was just ordering out every day. And even if you're ordering like things that you think are healthy, you don't have any control over like what they put in the food. So started gaining weight there. And then immediately after that, my boyfriend and I moved in together in November. Well, then the holidays hit. So it was like all those things combined. Like, so cooking the food for my boyfriend, moving, and then 2 holidays back to back, Thanksgiving and Christmas. So it was just like all these things where I was just eating all this extra food. And then before you know it, I was 140 pounds. And I was like afraid to weigh myself during this because I could feel my body gaining weight. But for the first time, like, I'm okay with it. And that's just crazy to me because in the past, the idea of being 140 pounds was so scary. But like, there was seriously something wrong with my brain at the time because I'm going to include pictures between last year and this year. When I was 120 pounds, I actually saw a fat person in the mirror. And that's crazy. Like, the way perspective and like our brains are so powerful and our brains will play tricks on us. And I'm bringing this up because this might relate to somebody else for something completely different. Like it doesn't have to be weight. It could be like personal issues that you have by yourself. Like, you know, if you're a musician, you might think, oh, I'm a terrible saxophone player. I suck. I'm a bad father. I'm a bad this. Like if you're hypercritical of yourself, and sometimes you should be, and sometimes those things are true, and self-analysis is a good thing. But if you're like psychologically in a rough place over your confidence, like this is proof that what you see in the mirror, metaphorically, because it might not be about your appearance, isn't always real. Because back then I thought I was fat, and now I can really see myself clearly, and I'm like, holy shit, I look so much younger and healthier at 140 pounds than I did then, and I was younger then. You know what I mean? I'm like, this is crazy. Not to mention too, like another side perk of this is that, you know, we're getting a little shallow here, but it is part of it too, is that growing up, I always got poked fun at for having small breasts. And like I do comedy roasts, and that's always like the butt of the joke at the comedy roast is that like they always say like, oh, she's flat, she has no tits, whatever. I actually have breasts for the first time, which is like, and granted, they're still small, like compared, like, you know, because your body, you know, your genetics are your genetics. Like if I had huge tits, they would have been still there, even if I was skinny, probably. So they're still like small, but I went from being like pretty flat chested to like a B cup, which is to me like it feels like it's exciting. Like I always, growing up, I always heard a lot of my guy friends saying like, if I was a woman, like for a day, all I would do is play with my tits all day. Like that's literally all I would do. And I always thought like guys are so fucking weird. Like what are they talking about? But actually now that I've experienced that, that's literally true. Like I went from having no breasts to actually having something, and like literally all day long, like if I'm like reading a book, I'll look down and be like, oh hey, like I'll just like, it's just like, I don't know, it's like exciting. I've never had them before, so it's just like, it never occurred to me that the reason I didn't have them was because I was malnourished. Like I thought I was just flat, you know? So that's cool. I don't know. That's like a cool part of it is, and you know, without being shallow about it, it means I'm a healthy woman too. You know what I mean? Like, whatever. I don't know. I kind of wanted to bring that up, you guys. I wanted to get it off my chest, and I wanted to see if that would help anybody as well who might be doubting themselves or might be looking, you know, might be thinking there's something they're not, because it could be in your head. It could be, and some of the things could be true. Like I don't want to like mislead anybody. Like I mean, if you're genuinely in a place where you need to work on yourself, whether it's your weight or your skills, like yeah, analyze yourself and work on yourself, but also realize that if you're depressed about an element of yourself that is controlling you, it might be all in your head, you know. And shout out to anybody else who has gone through an eating disorder or is currently going through one. I just want to say it's not easy, and it could take years to get over, but keep trying. That's all I have to say is just keep trying to get better, and you will get better eventually. Okay, moving on to the questions. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. Some of these questions are fucking ridiculous. So this first question, the person wants to remain anonymous because the question is pretty not offensive, but like over the top, I guess. I don't know. It's actually really not that bad to me. Okay, so his question, and this, I will say it's a man who asked this question. He said, if a man doesn't put a towel down when you're on your period, is he a keeper? Let me repeat the question. If a man doesn't put a towel down when you're on your period, is he a keeper? So basically what he's saying is like, as a woman, do I think that I want a man to have sex with me on my period? So even though this question is like kind of silly, it's actually a good question. Like I want to bring something up about this. I'll answer the question in a second, but I want to bring up the fact that, like, pro tip for any men out there who, whether you're a young man who is just figuring out how to date women and are trying to figure things out, or you're an older man who has not had success and is in his 30s or 40s and still can't figure out women, pro tip right from the horse's mouth, not the whore's mouth, the horse's mouth, from a woman. I can tell you as a woman, there's something so sexy and comforting and nurturing about a man who isn't afraid to talk about those things with a woman. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think that you should go on a first date and be like, how's your period? Like, you know what I mean? That's not what I'm saying. I think obviously you have to wait till you're getting intimate with the woman, or, once things start getting intimate or you've been dating for a few months, I think that's a good time to start doing it. Like, I don't want you to go on the first date and be like, how's your cycle? Are you regular? Like, that would freak a woman out. But as things are developing, if you're trying to really like lock down a relationship, or if you're already in a relationship and you just want to improve things, I really recommend learning about the woman's body and just being in touch with that thing. Like, learn about, like, okay, for example, the other day my boyfriend like asked me, he was like, hey, are you ovulating right now? Like, and for some reason the fact that he brought that up was like, I felt so like, I don't know, I just felt like so comforted and nurtured. And I felt like, if you're going to be having sex with somebody, you have to be in touch with that stuff. Like, so I just felt like super cared for. So to answer your question, like, one, I think, yeah, you should not be grossed out or squeamish about that type of thing. And two, yeah, put a towel down and have sex with a woman on her period, because that just like kind of shows that you're mature and responsible enough to not be grossed out about those types of things, and you're open to talking about those types of things. I don't know. I think it's really cool when a man is like comfortable with those types of things. And I think a lot of women, I can't speak for all women, but I'm pretty sure I could speak for most women when I say like, we like that. So yeah, have sex with your girlfriend on her period. It rocks. Okay. Next question. Okay, this is from Alejandro. He is a classical guitarist. He's, I don't want to say, well, yeah, he's a classical guitarist, but he's more of like a flamenco, like Latin guitarist. Phenomenal. He's actually on my podcast. If you go scroll way down to like episode 1, 2, or 3, he was like one at the beginning. Great guitarist, like mind blowing. He asks me, although you are a classically trained pianist, how comfortable do you feel soloing over a tune? And I'm going to repeat the question. Although you are a classically trained pianist, how comfortable do you feel soloing over a tune? Okay. So first of all, if you're not a musician, this might be boring. So just click that fast forward button a few times to go past it. This is more for musicians. It'll make sense. Or if you're not a musician, you just think you might learn something, you can stick around too. Either way is cool, but I just figured I'd warn you. So I am a classically trained pianist. I do have a good ear though. Like I don't have perfect pitch, but I have a really solid relative pitch. Like I would say it's like, I don't know, like how do I explain it? So I can memorize a note. Like if I hear a G, I know it's a G, and I use that note. And I have like pretty good ear, so I'll use that note to like relate. I think that's what relative pitch is, by the way. It's like you can memorize a few notes, and then you use those notes that you do memorize to relate it to the other notes. Like, oh, okay, if that's a G, if I hear that, that's a C. So I think having a good ear definitely gives me a little more leeway into being comfortable soloing. I'm gonna say this: if I were to rate myself. Excuse me, when I do solo podcasts, I talk too loud and I start coughing. I'm going to talk a little quieter now. Backtrack. I'm going to like rate myself from 1 to 10 compared to like where I started and where I am now. So where I started, I would say when I first started learning classical, I'd probably give myself a 2 out of 10 on my soloing abilities. And right now I give myself a 6 out of 10, which I think, I still have a lot more to learn, but that's a significant improvement. And I can tell you the way I got there was 1, continuing to develop my ear. Okay. 2, listening to a lot of different kinds of music and not just sticking to one genre. listening to soloists, like listening to blues, listening to jazz, like things that you commonly hear solos. 2, 3, learning music theory. So whether you're someone who plays by ear, whether you're somebody who plays by ear or you're somebody who like reads the music, you should be able to analyze what you're doing. So the best way to do that is just to learn all your scales. The best thing I ever did to develop my soloing skills, and I'm reaching a plateau now where I'm trying to figure out what the next best thing to do is. So if you know what that is, you include it in the comment section. But the best thing that I did to improve my soloing skills at this point was to learn all the pentatonic scales in every single key, left and right, like in my sleep. Like, you know what I mean? That was the best thing I did. It's funny. A lot of people will argue that the pentatonic scales are overused and they're boring. There is some truth to that, but I'm also going to include a meme that I saw on this, I think it's Jazz Memes. It's on Instagram. And it's this like, it shows you, what is it, the bell curve where it's like a small percentile of people do this, a small percentile of people do this. Is that what the bell curve is? So it's a really funny meme. I'm going to include it. And what it says is on the very bottom is the pentatonic scale. And on the very top is the pentatonic scale. And everything in the middle is like all this advanced music theory. So basically the joke is like when you're new at soloing and you're just trying to figure things out, the first step you take is learning the pentatonic scales. That's what I did. Then as you get better, you get bored of them and you start like trying to advance your music theory and do all this wild, like crazy stuff, like negative harmony, like all these things. Like you try to get fancy. And then after all is said and done, when you're a total master, you learn that the pentatonic scales was the best thing. So I just think that's like such a cool meme and a cool joke, because I've had some like people that I look up to pianist wise that say that's not true. The pentatonic scales get really boring. But I've also had pianists, like I had a piano teacher that he's out of this world, so good at piano. He's like a creature from another dimension. And he 100% like wholeheartedly agrees with that sentiment that the main thing he uses is the pentatonic scale. So at this point, I can say whatever instrument you're playing, guitar, bass, whatever, drums I can't help you with. That's like a whole nother thing. But harmony-wise and melody-wise, if you want to learn how to solo, learn the fucking pentatonic scales, left and right, every single key, and also learn the minor ones and the major ones, because they're both useful in my opinion. And the blues, it doesn't hurt to also learn the blues scale. That will give you a lot of creative freedom to solo. What to do next, how to take it from a 6 to a 10, that I don't know. I'm trying to figure that out. So if you guys know that, explain that to me. Also, I should mention this. If you're a instrumentalist, also learn chord inversions. Like if you have an instrument that plays chords, obviously, like if you're a flute or whatever, I don't know, maybe there is some use to learning like the structure of chords on a flute, but I'm not sure. But I'm talking specifically for like piano players, guitarists, etc. Learn chord inversions and also learn those in every single key. Like if a musician doesn't know what a chord inversion is, like if someone's newer and needs me to explain that, it would be like, so you have for example, C major chord. So you can play that C, E, G, but you don't want to play it C, E, G every time. Sometimes you want to play it E, G, C or G, C, E when you have the chord structure. So chord inversions are also, when I started learning chord inversions, I noticed a huge improvement in my playing. So highly recommend it. Like, I know a lot of guitarists complain about this. They'll say like, hey, I learned all the shapes of, and I don't play guitar, so I don't really know what it means necessarily, but I think it has something to do with this. I know a lot of guitarists who will say like, I learned all the shapes of where my hand goes to play chords, but I don't actually know always what notes I'm playing. And I think if you're a guitarist, you should develop that and actually figure out what notes you're playing, so you can also learn and have access to every single possible chord inversion. So rather than only playing D in this one shape, figure out where else on the guitar you could play that D. And I'm not a guitarist, so I could be saying something stupid, but I have a feeling that that's probably true, because it's definitely true for piano. It's the same exact thing. All right. Okay, that was for the musician nerds. I have a few more questions left, and they're all from the same exact person. So let me start with the one that I think is the most important question on this list. So her name is I hope I'm saying this right. I think it's Cock-a-Nooble. So Cock-a-Nooble, she's an Instagram follower, and she's actually a comedian from Philly. She's going to be on my podcast soon. Her first question is, what are your thoughts on people with adult content pages? So I actually think this is a really good question, and it's an important question to discuss right now, because right now porn is it's everywhere. Like, porn is so big right now. This is something that my opinion has changed on a lot this year, because if you go down to some of my older videos, it might take too long to find it. So if you want later, you can literally just like type it in the search engine. Pranzata is the porn industry immoral. I think that's what it is. So Pranzata is the porn industry immoral. I made that last year. Back then, my opinion was that it's totally fine. Like, I'm going to be honest. I've always been a porn user since I was old enough to masturbate. Like, I'm pretty sure I started watching porn since I was like 12 or something like that. So because it was such a normal routine or part of my life, I never thought of it as anything weird or bizarre or abnormal. It wasn't really till this year that I started seeing it as a negative thing for me. And I'm at the point now where I'm seeing it as a negative thing for everybody. I think it's negative for the people watching it. I think it's negative for the people doing it. And I think it's a negative thing is there a third one? And there might only be two. Okay. I think so forget the three. I think it's for two. I think it's a negative thing for the people consuming it. And I think it's a negative thing for there is a third, for society. Okay. So let me break this down. The people watching it, the people creating it, and for society as a whole, I think it's not a good thing. Back when I made that video last year, my opinion was that it's everybody does it. Who gives a fuck? I think my perspective at that time was like, I saw it as just an aid for a sexual fantasy, which I don't, I think sexual fantasy is healthy and normal. I think even if you're in a relationship or whatever, I think sexual fantasies and having fantasies about other people or other things or whatever, I actually think that's a healthy thing. I think, in my opinion, most sexual fantasies are your brain trying to work out a psychological issue. So for example, I know this is an extreme example, but let's say you're a woman who had been sexually abused, but you're having sexual fantasies about being sexually abused. What the hell is that? That's very common. I think, in my opinion, that might be your psychology trying to work out the control that you felt you lost. And it might be a way of trying to take back the control. Okay, maybe if this, was something that I wanted, then it wouldn't have been something that happened to me. It's something that I'm doing. Things like that. And by the way, I speak as I don't mean to sound insensitive and speak for people in that situation. I speak that of someone who's a woman who's been through things like that. So it's, coming from the horse's mouth, like I said before. Other things too, that could be true for, let's say there's a man who, by the way, this is actually true. I heard this on a podcast. Apparently Donald Trump was known to have a sexual fetish for being pissed on. And I think that's a way of working out a psychological issue. He's a very dominating, kind of narcissistic psychopath. Maybe getting pissed on is a way for him to let go of the control. You know what I mean? So that's what I mean. I think that sexual fantasies are good and healthy and normal. So in the past, I always viewed sexual content as just an aid to those sexual fantasies. I never saw it as a big deal. It wasn't until recently that I started to see it as well, wait a second. These are real people. These people in these videos are real people. To me, I might feel detached from it because it's just I'm just fantasizing and masturbating. But I'm wait a second. These are actual people with stories and histories. And it really started to make me think deeper about it. not only that, but I might get to this a little more later, but I think this is a very important conversation to have right now because we're transitioning into a period where things are becoming, virtual reality is becoming reality. Like we're becoming so technical and so in our phones that what once was like a porn magazine is now like, I don't even know where the lines are anymore. Like, how do you like, okay, I feel like my brain's jumping all over the place and I can't finish the sentence. I apologize about that. Okay, so for example, there was a Black Mirror episode where they kind of pointed out what I'm talking about. There was a Black Mirror episode where there was a man who was like in a marriage and in a family, and there was like a virtual reality video game that he was playing where it was so real that basically he was the character and he was having like a sexual relationship with another character. And I think I started getting triggered during that because like I've been cheated on before, and there's been cheating, in my family history. So cheating, the topic of cheating is very triggering for me. And I remember I couldn't even finish the episode because it like really kind of shook me up. Like it made me realize like if we're evolving into this society that is virtual, well, how do you differentiate between like what is actually having a relationship with somebody? Like if there's like a virtual reality having sex with somebody, how do you, like, at what point and at what line is that real if everything is becoming virtual? You know what I mean? So that's like a whole nother issue, and it's kind of getting away from the original question you just asked me. So I don't know if I want to even get into that, but I do want like people to think about that because that's actually, that's interesting. But to get back to the original question, why do I think it's bad now or like a negative thing? I think, okay, for one, for the consumer, I think it's bad for two reasons. For one, I think it's like kind of like a quick dopamine fix. Like I think it's no different than picking up your phone and over scrolling things. Like I think it's like, or eating fast food or eating junk food. Like I think it's kind of like, I think a lot of people go to porn to deal with emotional issues, and rather than actually dealing with the issues, they just kind of look for something to distract themselves, and it's like a quick dopamine fix. So I think for that reason, for me in particular, like I noticed that in the past I was using it for those reasons, to kind of deal with stress and rather than actually tackling the stress. So that's one reason I don't think it's good, and it becomes addicting for that reason. Looking back, I think I was kind of addicted to it as well because I would notice it would like really distract me. Secondly, I would say it's bad for the consumer. I would say more in particular for men than women, probably, because I think there's a lot of men out there now that, because we are transitioning into such a virtual reality, that and after the pandemic too, like a lot of kids, like a lot of teenagers were, at home and doing Zoom lessons and Zoom classes. I think a lot of people are losing the ability to communicate with other people. So I think that pornography is making it harder for men to actually learn how to communicate with women, because why go through the trouble of learning how to communicate with people when you can just get your needs met online easily? And I think it's a short-term solution. Like it might feel good in the moment, but I think in the long term, it's just creating more loneliness. Like in particular for men. Women are always going to get laid no matter what. So like I think women, if they watch porn, they're still going to get laid in real life too. So I think, for men this is more true, but I don't think it's a good thing to rely on porn to get those needs met, because you're just not developing the skills you actually need to communicate with real people. So I do feel like sympathetic for young people who watch a lot of porn or are addicted to porn, because I feel like they're kind of robbing themselves of the experience to build a real connection with a human being, Secondly, I would say, like, going back to I don't think it's good for the people creating it. I feel like at a first glance, you might think it's empowering for the women who are creating it, especially nowadays, in a situation where you can just make your own page and all the funds go to you. Like maybe in the past, it was very clearly not empowering for women because a lot of women would make these videos and all the profits would go to like these porn pimps, like the men at the top who would make all the money in their company. I think now women are able to create their own content, which at first glance, it seems empowering, right? Like, it's like, oh, wow, now women can take control. But still at the end, it's like they're placing their value on, they're selling their sexuality. And I don't think sexuality is something that should be taken lightly. I think that's a mistake we are making today as a society. And that's a whole nother thing. Like I don't even want to get too far into that, but I don't really see in the long term, how do I phrase this? Yes, in the short term, you're taking control and you're financially supporting yourself and you're making money, and that's empowering. But in the long term, are you really going to find satisfaction with that within those financial gains you're making if you're doing that by selling your sexuality, which I believe is something special? Like, I don't know. How is that going to really make you feel in the long run, you know? And not only that, but for the people who are like, yeah, but I'm supporting these women who can't feed their children. True. You know what I mean? Like, if there's a situation where a woman is desperate for financial resources and this is the only way she can get it, I don't want to like take that away from somebody if that's the way. But at the same time, it's like, if we really feel sympathetic for these women, shouldn't we just give them money without expecting them to show us their tits? Like, you know what I mean? Like if I'm like, oh my God, this poor woman can't feed her kids. Like, show me your tits and then I'll help you feed your kids. Why don't we just like have a better solution where we actually take care of the poor, and then that won't be the solution? You know what I mean? So like, I don't know. I thought about that. And then for society as a whole, I think it's desensitizing us from these things, from these questions. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of people say porn is normal. And I said that last year in the video, that I thought it was normal. I'm like, yeah, porn is normal. What are you talking about? But I'm starting to realize now that just because something's normal doesn't mean it's good. Like, you know, so I don't know. That's my take on it. And by the way, cock-a-noodle, I sincerely apologize if you're somebody who has adult content and you're going to be on my podcast and everything. I don't want you to take that as like I disapprove of you personally. One of my goals on this podcast is to be able to discuss these issues and still have love and respect for each other. So if we disagree on that, I'm really sorry. I still want to show you nothing but love and respect, regardless of our differences and opinions, you know? I mean, to a degree with some people though, like if some people's like evil, like not you, I'm talking about like different situations. Like if I have a podcast guest that I like clearly after talking to them thinking they're partaking in some sort of evil, like, yeah, I'm not going to necessarily show my respect for that person. But I'm just saying in general, when good, decent people have differences of opinions, I want to be able to walk out of that situation with love, respect, and understanding for the other person's perspective. And by the way, I understand the perspective of having adult content because I've been in a situation where I thought of doing that myself. Like, I've been in a lot of financial debt, and there has been times in my life where I'm like, maybe I should just be a stripper, like, and I'd pay off all my student loan debt. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not even saying my opinion's correct. I could be totally wrong. And I understand the other side of things as well. But right now, my opinion is leaning towards, I do think that pornography is a negative thing for society. And, you know, the whole thing about like, is it cheating when virtual reality is becoming reality? That's like a whole nother topic that I don't want to get into, but it's something that I think as a society we need to talk about, because clearly we're heading in the direction of virtual reality. So as that's happening, I do think clear lines need to be created about those things before we get there, or else relationships are going to be ruined left and right. You know, I mean, they kind of already are in some cases, but you know what I mean. Okay, 2 more questions. I think these ones are going to be short and easy. And they're both from Cock-a-Noodle. Her second question is, if you could change one thing about your podcast, what would it be? The only thing right now I would change, well, there's probably a lot of things I would change, but like the one I would focus on is just getting help for it, because I'm kind of a one-woman show right now. I would love to be in a financial place where I could afford a producer. So someone who's with me, who deals with tech issues, somebody who helps me promote things. Because right now I'm producing them, promoting them, and coming up with the content. Like you guys help me out with the questions, but you know what I mean. It's a lot. So I would think right now where I'm at, I would like to have help. I would like to have an assistant. Maybe it's something I should meditate on. Like I was meditating about having more time in the day, I would say another thing would be the second priority would be to have better gear. I've had some people criticize the channel, that the face looks a little washed out. Well, that's because I'm using my phone to record it and I can't afford a better quality camera right now. But it's all baby steps, little by little. For me, the first step is to grow it to the first 1,000 followers. And I think once I reach that point, I have enough faith in the podcast that I can start investing in it. Okay, I can get gear, I can get an assistant, those types of things. Which, by the way, just a friendly reminder to subscribe to the podcast so we can get to that point. Okay. Next question, and the final question of the podcast today is also by Cockanoodle, who is your dream podcast guest? Okay. This is actually I'm going to try to answer this. It's kind of hard for me to answer because I know who my dream people that I would want to be on their podcast. Probably the 4 people I would literally dream come true if I could be on their podcast would be obviously Joe Rogan, Tim Dillon, hilarious comedian, Andrew Huberman. He's a really amazing neuroscientist who gives amazing content for free. Who did I say? I said Joe Rogan, Andrew Huberman, Tim Dillon, hilarious comedian. Lex Friedman, probably my favorite podcaster right now. And then the last would have to be Jordan Peterson. Those would be the 5 ones that I would want to be on their podcast because it wouldn't make sense to have them on mine because they have huge podcasts. So it would make more sense if I was on theirs because then my voice could reach different, I can gain a following through their podcast. So as far as dream conversations, I'd love to talk to those 5 people. Literally would be a dream come true. As far as people being on my podcast, it wouldn't make sense to have them on my podcast because what I just said, I would have to go with somebody who's successful but a little smaller than that. Damn, I don't really know. I would say probably the comedian. Okay, I know exactly. It would be 2 comedians that I would love to have on my podcast because I actually think it would be doable one day. One would be Mark Normand. He's a beloved comedian amongst the comedy world. He's beloved amongst the fans and comedians. And then the other would be Theo Von. Those would be 2 that I think if my podcast gets, big enough, I think they would be willing to come on the podcast. I've seen Mark Normand in particular do smaller podcasts. He's just such a loving guy. He's not this famous arrogant snob. He's very down to earth and he's been on the Joe Rogan podcast, but he'll also go on a local comedian's podcast. And I think that's awesome. So I would love to have him on my podcast one day. Theo Von's a little bit bigger. I don't know if you'd be willing to go on a small podcast, but he's also incredibly down to earth and so fucking funny. So I would say those would be my 2 dream podcast guests at this point. Ultimate dream would be to go on those other podcasts I had mentioned earlier. And then if my podcast ever got big enough to have them on mine would also be a dream too. But, that's getting way ahead of myself. Okay. So that's actually it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast episode. It's been a while since I've done a solo one, so I'm a little rusty with the solo ones, but I had fun. I think we talked about some interesting things that we should think about, Anyways, that's it. Pranzata Podcast, episode number 71. Again, if you're new, don't forget to hit subscribe and don't forget to leave a comment and hit the like button. Leave a comment on anything we talked about, if anything, piqued your interest or you have an opposing opinion or whatever. Or you agree. I don't know. Whatever floats your boat. All right. Have a good night, guys. Bye.